Right, good evening, everybody. It's my enormous pleasure to introduce Jack Chadwick tonight. Many of you will have been with us when he had to rush his girlfriend to the hospital last year. He's now talking to us, would you believe it, from Medellin in Colombia, where he's working. He has a momentous occasion to tell us about on March the 7th. And without any more ado, over to you, Jack. If you could unmute yourself,
Yeah.
lovely.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining my talk today. I'm really, really, really chuffed to be able to give it. And yeah, I just would like to add my sincere apologies for to any of you who tuned in for the one a year ago, and had the inconvenience of what happened, which was such a horrible fluke. Usually I think of fluke as a good thing, but in that case, it was one of those times when just I don't know, it was traumatic to think about, to be honest. But anyway, I can waffle. So without further ado, I'll start the presentation. I'm just going to be reading from notes. I'm not going to be sharing my screen or anything. However, I can make the notes available afterwards if anyone would like to go through them if it's easier for people to. I know for me it's easier to read than it is to hear. So yeah. I'm going to start at the beginning of my sort of engagement with this topic. The topic being Jack Hilton, but Jack Hilton sort of through the lens of Orwell. And I want to sort of emphasize from the beginning how the two characters here, Orwell and Jack Hilton, for me have been together from the very beginning. From the very first time I picked up a Jack Hilton book, Caliban Shrieks, 3 years ago, in a library in Salford that maybe some of you have heard about. It's a small one, but one of the best assets. I hate to call it an asset, but one of the best things about Manchester, Greater Manchester, the working class movement library, which does fantastic work. I'm proud to be a supporter and member of. So I'm going to read what I read when I saw this book out of the corner of my eye with a weird sort of a skeleton on the cover, a cover that was clearly ancient, yellow, and coming apart, falling away from itself. So I picked up this book, which was just left on the side while I can't even remember what I was supposed to be doing. Picked up this book and opened it, and then bowled over by this opening page from Jack Hilton, which I'll read now for you. Caliban is a man you should know well, a freckled whelp, hag-born, not honoured with a human shape. He holds opinion about his rights, such foolishness he should overcome. I know the musings and tirades of my modern Caliban flout all the accepted rules of writing, but you taught me a language, and my profit on it, I know how to curse. For red plague rid you for learning me your language. I break from a personal to a diatribe against all and sundry, but there is neither bush nor shrub to bear off any weather at all, and another storm a brewing. You may not want to be disturbed by Caliban's inflicted importance. Still he is here. I give you his story, from infancy to infirmity, as clear as my feeble ability can arrange it for you. The jargon is one of a humorous demagogue, which there is no apology. So these are the words that Hilton would have himself read when, in 1935, he was asked by his good friend Richard Rees to review Caliban Shrieks for a crusading modernist magazine called The Adelphi, that was set up to sort of be a barnacle on the side of British literature at the time, which was still very conservative. It always has been conservative in some ways. And the Adelphi was all about doing something new. And it says the modernism part of it was the emphasis on the modernist movement and particularly bringing and finding a new person to sort of carry on the mantle of those early modernist authors, such as, most importantly, D.H. Lawrence, who the idea behind the Adelphi was to sort of keep the flame burning for that kind of literature, which was, it's hard to think now, but it was so chastised by so many at the time. So when Rees asked Orwell at that time Eric Blair to review Caliban Shrieks for the Adelphi, It was the first time Orwell had ever reviewed a piece of what we'd call working class literature, at the time also known as proletarian literature, which is a difficult term because a lot of people misunderstand proletarian literature to mean something akin to the project of authors in the Soviet Union, the state-sanctioned project of authors in the Soviet Union, to sort of just, write novels that were making these very sort of explicit and sort of crude, vulgar arguments in favour of Marxism or communism. What the actual meaning of proletarian literature was is completely different, and can't be reduced to that. And Orwell, understood that from the beginning, and I think probably what he read in Caliban Shrieks helped him form a view of proletarian literature was more accurate to the intentions of the authors. Caliban Shrieks deals with its topic, its subject from the inside, and the subject here being sort of the life of Hilton. It's autobiographical, in a sort of tricky way, in that it doesn't really deal much with the facts, the biographical facts of Hilton's life. It's much more about conveying the internal workings of this man's mind, and this is what Orwell picked up on immediately. He praised Hilton for his courage and the humour of the book and the fearful realism, I think is the term he used. But above all else, the vivid notion of what it feels like to be poor. That was one thing, that was one part of it. But then, second and perhaps most important for Orwell, the biggest discovery that Orwell made with Hilton was how this book had succeeded in conveying a frame of mind. More than the mere telling of a story, is a quote from the review. In fact, I'll read a little bit more from the review. Books like this, which come from genuine workers and present a genuinely working class outlook, are exceedingly rare and correspondingly important. They are the voices of a normally silent multitude. All over England, in every industrial town, there are men by scores of thousands whose attitude to life, if only they could express it, would be very much what Mr. Hilton's is. I realise what a considerable literary gift must have gone into the making of Mr. Hilton's book. The book opened a window onto working class life and political expression, topics that were far, far removed from Orwell's own early world, the world of his first 30 or so years. And when he was aware of this gap, this ignorance, he sought immediately to address it, and was in fact presented with the opportunity to do just that when, in 1936, in January 1936, he accepted a commission from his publisher to write a book based on his personal impressions of the social effects of mass unemployment in the industrial north. We all know now that this became The Road to Wigan Pier, and it's now almost a legendary journey that he undertook. But Orwell, in January 1936, when he took on this commission, was a total stranger, not only to the problems and conditions, but to the depressed regions themselves. I don't think he'd ever been up north. Indeed, when he first spoke publicly about his experience in the sort of a research phase of the book, to an audience at the Adelphi Summer School, which was, I think, 1936 August, he appropriately entitled his task, "An Outsider Sees the Depressed Areas." Now, when he accepted the commission, and he'd only a few months earlier reviewed Caliban Shrieks, it's obvious that the natural first choice for a conduit or vessel into this new continent of British life, the British working class, remained foggy and clouded to Orwell from based on his background in the early part of his life. The obvious choice for that vessel or conduit was Jack Hilton, who he had, we think, met in scant passing maybe even a couple of times at independent socialist party events in the north, which I think I lied. I think George Orwell had come up north maybe once or twice before for a summer school and for the inaugural conference of the Independent Socialist Workers' Party in Manchester. So many of you will know way, way more than I do about the biographical details of Orwell's life. And I'm hoping to hear what you think about this, because it's a little contentious little theory, but it's supported by interviews with Jack Hilton, conducted prior to his death in 1983, just prior to his death, in the final few years of his life, reflecting on some correspondence between Orwell and Hilton that there's been lost, unfortunately. If Orwell neither Hilton nor Orwell kept these letters or were able to keep them because of the turbulence that followed. But supposedly, and unknown to famous biographies of Orwell, like that of Crick, Hilton was asked by Orwell for accommodation in Rochdale and to use Hilton's house as a base for his research into the town of Rochdale, which he saw as sort of being the paradigm, the sort of perfect location for a study of working class life in the industrial north. Now, the Cottoners of Rochdale were his first intention. He came before the Wigan miners in Orwell's estimations for who would make a good subject of this book. But unfortunately, when he wrote to Orwell when he wrote to Hilton rather requesting to stay in his one up, one down terrace in a slum in Rochdale, Hilton wrote back agreeing that while Rochdale would be good as a base, he was unable to host Orwell in his tiny terrace, which was dirty by the fact that they had no money whatsoever and no hot water or anything like that. It was a tiny one up, one down, as I say. You can picture it. I was thinking of maybe putting a picture of it in this presentation, but I think you can all do a good job of imagining what it was like. So Orwell got back and said no, and especially because it wasn't the done thing to have a stranger staying with you and it's just you and your wife. It just wasn't culturally the thing that was done in the north of England. So there was a big already there was an obvious sort of divide in the sort of culture of the two authors that this incident highlights. But however, Hilton did recommend that Orwell go to Wigan. And there's a quote here. That he said, yes, you should go to Wigan, for they are good people, good folk in Wigan. And that's what happened. And eventually, we find out that based on these interviews that an academic I'm indebted to, George Blay, in the early 80s, these interviews that he conducted with Hilton, we find out about what happened afterwards, especially in terms of Hilton's response to the Road to Wigan Pier. Which is to say it's complicated is the sort of headline, and I'm going to go through why with you. First of all, Hilton felt kind of, I'm quoting here, felt kind of responsible for Wigan Pier in the sense that he encouraged Orwell when he said he wanted to come to Lancashire. I told him that the best kind of English working class were the Wiganers, and they were proud people and good people, honest and decent. And if he wanted to know anything at all about the English working man, he must see a miner, see him physically. So when the Road to Wigan Pier eventually arrived when Hilton got hold of a copy, what he wrote in response to that was that was quite harsh, really, on the surface. So George, this is a quote, so George went to Wigan and he might have stayed away. He wasted money, energy and woke piffle. He from the get-go, he attributed these problems of the text, as he saw it, to the social handicap that Orwell had in terms of being, another quote, a tall ex-officer type, Eton, modest, non-hard boozing, non-hard cursing, non-crude gamestering, no locale in the dialect sense. Of course his contact shut up. Of course, faced with this kind of guy, an alien in Wigan, it would have been very difficult for anyone there to have actually had a conversation with Orwell that wasn't very sort of bound by, let's be frank, by intimidation of one's social betters. So the Plasterer writer Hilton's major criticisms was his lack of balance in the portrayal of working class life. In particular, there's this thing that really got at Hilton, really got at him. So it's the descriptions of smell and hygiene that seem to go throughout the first part of Road to Wigan Pier, which really annoyed and upset Orwell and Hilton rather, and I suppose also a lot of other working class people who read him. George wanted to get to the pith and he didn't know how, and he failed. So he made it his HQ, a debile tripe shop cum lodging house where the man and woman were debile and the atmosphere debile, and the fat heads of readers unassociated with what can be done in art about the rough stuff of pro-life got a colour that wasn't worth the paint mixes. Authenticity in the sense of Wiganers and Wigan was travestied. George was a baby empiric imp making the most of a limited experience, giving a picture grotesque, false to the general whole. So this was Wigan, the Wigan of 40 nights sleep with a tripe shop, shades of Germinal, which many people didn't like. I mean, there's a sidebar, many people didn't like Germinal for its for the way it dealt with working class life. But as I said, it was complicated, and what you've just read was really hard. What you just heard is really harsh from Hilton, but actually, what you could say is he thought that the road to Wigan Pier was actually a complete achievement in some very important ways. First of all, he respected and admired George for the scale of the challenge that he'd attempted, and in a way, an impossible task for someone of his background. So Hilton respected it. And somehow, this is another quote, the book was more than the sum of its parts. George had come a long way forward with it and because of it. Meaning that although the study was lacking as a study of working class people and life, it achieved something important in so much that it brought forward a new Orwell, and the Orwell that we all know, the Orwell that we all have read, but who we started reading, in fact. The books that came after were all formed by this experience of his. And from this coming forward came George, the practical performing the arts of empiricism and advocatus diaboli. Now, to move on, Orwell, and this is, I guess, the next section of my talk, which is in two pieces. The first is the second section. I'd like to, the main takeaway for this talk for everyone here, I'd like it to be this one thing, but I think of the many varied uses of George Orwell's legacy over the years, mostly good, but some, it's hard to judge. I believe that one of the uses of his legacy that he would be most pleased about, were he able to have seen it, happened last year in the republication of Caliban Shrieks, in the fact that now Caliban Shrieks is going to be republished. And it is not at all obvious to me that Hilton's masterpiece would have ever stood a chance of republication had we not had Orwell's voice echoing down the decades from that review, and from furthermore from the evidence of the support and in a way the support that he gave to Hilton after was more than Orwell went to bat for anyone else, is my understanding. He offered and gave support to Hilton in his writing career that went far beyond what Orwell even did for his own close friends of many years. The review alone has helped massively in convincing publishers of the value of Caliban Shrieks and of Hilton's work. It's been a good headline to use. There was also another review by Auden that's been very helpful. But of great importance has been the concrete evidence of Orwell's efforts to assist Hilton in his writing. They maintained a correspondence for a period of about 15 or so years. Much of it is lost, and it was punctuated by these huge gaps of illness and turbulence in both men's lives. Disappearing, not knowing where the other lived, etc., losing letters, etc. When they managed to re-establish contact towards the end of the Second World War, Hilton was in London, and he wrote to Orwell, and Orwell wrote back immediately with a long letter of an offer of an invitation to Hilton to come immediately, as soon as possible, to Orwell's own residence, his flat in London in Islington. And as George Woodcock, an Orwell scholar, has noted, it was incredibly rare for Orwell to invite anyone he knew to his London flat. There was only less than a handful of people even who ever had that privilege. So Orwell clearly respected and what's more, wanted to establish this kind of relationship with Hilton. And I've got a few theories as to why, but I think the main one is I'd like to sort of highlight how I think maybe Hilton had a role in influencing Orwell's own politics. And there's some evidence for this, some quite strong evidence, in the fact that one of the times when they re-established contact after a long break was in when Orwell got out of hospital, and Hilton had published a book called English Ways, which was a sort of a travelogue, but a warped, bastardized travelogue, which was a social satire, taking forward the attitudes and the writing style and the humor and the sort of focus on minds and mindsets and the development of ideas into the travelogue format. When Hilton published English Ways, Orwell reviewed it with, you know, with the same gusto, the same affection and respect and admiration as he had with Caliban Shrieks. Reading Jack Hilton's book, one realizes how unsatisfactory these people are from the point of view of all them nosy parkers who is constantly trying to elevate them. This is a review that talks about the sort of types of people that are highlighted in English Ways. Now, I'm not going to read the whole quote for the sake of time, but what's important is that in an essay that came after The Lion and the Unicorn, which is a very important, I believe, a very important sort of how do you say it, sort of pivot or whatever in the development of Orwell's ideas and politics. The review of English Ways is echoed in The Lion and the Unicorn, and it's clear that a lot of that George's response to Hilton's book helped him shape his own ideas about the ideal kind of English socialism, and that furthermore he always respected Hilton for being this kind of independent English socialist, this socialist in a backwards, always of a way that Hilton described himself sense. Let me find a quote. So Hilton explained, "I'm a progressive backward man, nearer to Tolstoy than Lenin, nearer to the peasant ideology of the Chartists than our industrial revolution defeated. My romanticism wants for mankind a simple way of life. I had compromised to the extent of planning to take away physical drudgery and accept a limited technocratic technocracy to conquer real poverty." So this is actually quite similar to my understanding of what Orwell's politics was, especially at this period, where he was very much a socialist, but he was very much an English socialist, not in the 1984 sense, but rather in that he had this great love for nature and for the independence that characterized a lot of English socialism of the period, and especially as it was sort of put across so strongly in Hilton's letters, personal letters, and his literature and his writing. So Hilton went to bat. So Orwell went to bat for Hilton in so many ways. He wrote letter after letter to publishers seeking their support for Hilton. He even went to console Hilton at a lunch with a messenger from the Jonathan Cape publishing house when they told Hilton that unfortunately they wouldn't be giving him a multi-book deal, which is the sort of a moment when Hilton decided to leave writing, leave publishing, and go back to plastering, because he realised that he couldn't live off it in the same way that someone from an upper class background could. We couldn't get the same opportunities as someone from that background could. So he was totally dependent on this contract coming through, and Orwell worked so hard to get this contract in place. But then in 1945, just after the war, I believe, it was a no. And Orwell went along to this Greek restaurant in London to sort of comfort his friend. I think it's very fair to say that the two men by this point had developed an unusual friendship that was perhaps aided by the fact they had quite similar temperaments. They both were quite quiet men. And it's funny, whenever I hear people recount Jack Hilton, they say he was a listener. They say that he would sit there and listen and ask the odd really a good question, right? The one time that it's been the other way around is in when Hilton was recounting his conversations with Orwell, where actually, because the two men were naturally quite like this, so we were both listeners and would sit there and sort of take everything in and then you know, come out with questions rather than sharing any. I mean, Orwell was famous for never sharing anything about his personal life. He in fact did share stuff about his personal life with Hilton, including about his first wife's illness, details that he didn't share with anyone else, aside from very, very close friends. But so there was this sort of the one time when it was the other way around, when Hilton was the talker, was with Orwell. And I think that says a lot. And I think, you could read a lot into that, really. And I'm going to wrap up soon, because I'm aware that I'm supposed to have spoken for 15 minutes and it's already 25. So I hope it's been worth the extra 10 minutes. And yeah, I'm really keen to hear about what people think of this, because like I say, all of you have more knowledge about Orwell than me, I think. And I'm really keen to hear what you think about this relationship as I've described it. And also I'm happy to talk more about Caliban Shrieks itself in the Q&A, and about the process, the really bizarre, twisting process of getting it republished, which has included, it's been fluke after fluke and all good ones. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And thank you everyone for coming along, and I hope it's been worth your time.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. You did actually cut yourself short. You could have had at least 40 minutes, but so I would say, if you want to carry on and just tell us a bit about the publishing process and what your launch plans are. I've been in touch with Rin, as you know.
Perfect. Yes, that's brilliant. I apologize. My note taking must have been, I think I was relying on notes from last year, but handwritten. I need to get better at that. But yeah, happy to talk a bit about the publication process. So going back to that library in Salford, and coming across the Caliban Shrieks, and I sat there. As I said, I totally forgot what I got into the library to do. I was just killing time. It was at the end of COVID as well, and I was out of work as someone who worked in hospitality in managing nightclubs. I'd been out of work for the entire pandemic, and was looking to kill time in Manchester. I found this book, and I opened it. I read that first page, and I could not put it down. And I just sat there, taking it all in, reading it for I think I was there for about 4 or 5 hours, and I got halfway through the 160-page book, because it was not like reading to me. It felt like I was sat at a pub table having someone tell the best story I've ever heard. And for some reason, I heard Jack Hilton speak with my own grandfather's voice, maybe subconsciously knowing that my grandfather's accent was that of Rochdale. It felt very different, is the point I'm making, to any other book that reading any other book that I've read. It felt more personal in a way. And I think part of that is what Orwell got at, of how the book is letting you inside the mind of this man, and showing you and taking you through the developments of his own, to use a fancy word, ideology, his own perspective on the world. It's linking the development and changes in his perspective to these concrete events in his life that he's describing, always through the lens of his own ideas about it, rather than ever like sort of just being about factual relaying of well, this happened and then this happened, blah, 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 blah. The cause and effect happens inside. It's all about, that's what's described in a very poetic way. The book is written in a Shakespearean meter. I'm not an expert on this, but it's littered with these allusions, and that's why you buy one book, but you get about 3 readings worth of it, because you can read it again and again and again and get different things from it each time and notice different things each time. So I read this book, and all of these thoughts occurred to me. And then I went to a librarian and asked her about it. And she said, I don't know much. I don't know anything about this guy, but I know he was a Northern writer, and that this book is special in some way. And I know that the author, Jack Hilton, had been sort of like, there's some mysterious circumstances surrounding his exit from writing, that he had just suddenly stopped writing after 15 years. And so I went away, me and the librarian went away to do some research, and I couldn't find much on the internet. I couldn't find anything at all. The librarian had, got a sort of vague sense of been able to piece together a little bit more. She told me that he was from Rochdale, and that he'd stopped writing because of publishers wouldn't publish him, basically. She's been able to find this out through the word of mouth grapevine of the library's amazing network of patrons and supporters, who were all have different special expertise on working class writing. So when I was furious at the thought of having read what I've immediately recognized as one of the best pieces of writing that I'd ever come across, and meaningful to me because of where I come from in the north. But I felt a sense of horror at the fact that this book had been denied to the people of the north, and especially working class people, that we have no real literary canon, or the literary canon so rarely ever comes north, and so very rarely speaks of northern working class people's lives. or just working class people's lives in general, but I think it's particularly felt in the north. And I felt aggrieved by it, and I set out to think about how I could put this right. But first of all, I knew I needed to learn more about Hilton, so I started to try to trace his family. And this led me all over the place. At one point, I was thinking that he had living relatives in Australia. And I was trying to use ancestry.com to do it all, and it wasn't working. But I can't remember exactly how, but I came across one piece of information is that he'd lived. Someone from the Library Network, I think, had told me that he'd lived in Oldham at the end of his life, and then at that point, after failing to come up with anything else other than to confirm that he had died childless in 1983. What I did then was I thought it's the last throw of the dice. I'm familiar with the kind of pubs in Manchester that have been standing for many, many decades. I mean, they are falling like flies at the moment, but there are many pubs in Manchester that have communities where for generation after generation, it's a web, and it's a network for just like the pub that my grandparents went to. You would have been able to. I thought you would have been able to ask someone in that pub about something that happened in the 70s, and you'd have a 50-50 chance of getting an answer about it. But was maybe a little bit myth, but potentially this kind of I think institutional memory would be a sociologist's term or whatever for this kind of like where memory is congealed in these places. I thought maybe one of the pubs in Oldham near where I thought that Hilton had passed away would have remembered him. So I went into a few different pubs, 3 actually across Chadderton, which is part of Oldham, and I put up posters in 2 of them and got a pint, obviously. And then on the final one, I got there, and I'm talking to the bar, the woman on the bar about what I'm doing. And as I'm doing it, as I'm about to put up a poster, an old regular comes over and tells me that although she doesn't really remember Hilton at all, she remembers a quiet old man who used to come into the pub in the 80s and 70s with 2 of his friends who were much younger. And she only remembered him because his friends, well, one of them at least, Brian, was much, much younger. It was Bill, Brian, and Jack. And unfortunately, Bill passed away in the 90s, but Brian lived until 2022. So I just missed him, sadly. He passed away while I was looking for him, in fact. But the woman who came up to me, whose name I did not get because I was quite drunk, I think, by this point, was able to tell me roughly where the address of Brian. So I went and knocked on this road, and one of the neighbours said, yeah, they live just down there. And I went down and knocked on the door, no response. Luckily, I had a pen and paper on me. I never carry pen. Until then, I never carry pen and paper with me, ever. But I did that day for some reason. I think subconsciously I thought, oh, I'm doing something investigative, blah, 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 put a pen and paper in my bag, whatever. So I went and left a little note. We got really soggy because it was like very Manchester weather. Put it through the letterbox, and it was, I think it's like a month later, I got an email back from no, it was you know what? It was a week. It was a week. So it was a month until I actually met the woman who lived at this property, Brian's widow. But she emailed me back immediately saying, yes, unfortunately, Brian's passed away, but it'd be great to meet up to talk about our beloved old Jack, who she remembered. And so that's what happened. The other thing, fluke, she was about to move house in that same week. So if I'd been a week later, there's a good chance that, the letter would have just fallen into the hallway of an empty home and been, swept up in loads of tatty, takeaway leaflets or whatever. So that was 2 huge flukes in the space of a week, right, to get this book back to life. I then meet Mary. I bring her some custards, as we call them in Manchester, like, custard tarts. And we have a cup of coffee, cup of tea, and talk for hours about Hilton, about Jack Hilton, her beloved old Jack. And it was amazing watching her in real time recall memories of Jack and be like, oh, and one more thing, and that process will continue because me and Mary we see each other until I left Manchester. We saw each other roughly about once every 1 month or something over coffee in the city centre. We went to the theatre to see Maxine Peake. We've become good friends despite the 50-year age gap. I then sussed out that Mary was because Mary was able to tell me when Jack had died and the conditions of his death. I then was able to look up the death certificate. This hadn't been, no one else had been able to do this before because there was a lot of confusion over when and where Jack Hilton died. It was for some reason reported that he died in Wiltshire, which misled a lot of academics and a lot of investigators down these, complete dead ends. So no one had been able to find his last will and testament or anything. Based on what Mary told me, I was able to find it. And then I was able to realise, based on reading it, that all of his rights had gone to Brian and then reverted to Mary upon Brian's death. So I tell Mary this, and then she passes me the rights, saying, Jack, I'm going to give you these rights. You just have to promise me that you're going to do absolutely everything in your power to get these books back, in print. And every time I felt really intimidated about that, because at the end of the day, I was just some guy who works in a nightclub, pretty nocturnal. I love books and I love writing and stuff, but I've done some writing myself at this point, but I was by no means the person you would think of as, the person to get a book into, back into print or whatever. So then after that, what happened is, based on me and Mary's conversations, I then wrote an article myself for a fantastic local Manchester magazine news outlet. It's entirely online, called The Mill. It does some amazing investigative work and stories that covers everything. I just read it this morning. It had a story about a soldier from Manchester who went and died in Ukraine, and it's just fantastic. It's like the only good bit of news about English journalism at the moment is the arrival of outlets like The Mill. So I wrote this article. It took forever, and the editing process took forever as well. And it was about 4 months later that the story came out. And when it came out, it was a snowball effect of people reading it in The Mill's audience and passing it on to other people, and eventually it came to the ears of producers working in the media, in the BBC and Times Radio, and the Independent or the Eye ran a story about it. And it all happened very quickly over the space of about a month. That I was on front row talking about it in a 15-minute segment where they paid an actor to read out excerpts from a book, and he did a far better job than I did earlier. And then listening for a front row piece was the managing director of a Penguin Books imprint, Vintage Classics. And funnily enough, Vintage Classics, they absorbed Jonathan Cape, which was the publisher that had turned Hilton down for the multi-book deal, and the publisher that had to be fair on them, they had published him before that on single book deals. So it was a very funny turn of events that happened, and really fun to be part of, and I felt immense pride and thankfulness for being able to do this and to speak on behalf of Hilton in a way. And then after contact and a few months of discussions within Penguin, the publishers, they decided to go ahead and republish Caliban Shrieks. I've contributed an introduction for it, describing what I've just told you basically, but also they've got a fantastic author called Andrew Macmillan, a poet, who also works in Manchester. Like me, he's from Manchester. He's queer. He's motivated by the same sort of concerns as me, and he's written a fantastic introduction for the new edition, and become a really good friend of mine as well in the process. So it's taken a year from Penguin deciding to republish it to where we're at now, where it's currently being printed, I believe. The final sort of manuscript or whatever went off to the printers mid-December, ready for release on the 7th of March. And it's just basically Penguin have said, let's try to keep it all quiet until it's available to be published, to buy again. So it's been A lot of journalists in the press and in you know, even internationally, who want to cover the story now that it's got this fantastic happy ending, who haven't been able to because Penguin are like, "Shh, not yet." But one of them was the New Yorker. The New Yorker magazine are doing a feature on it, where a New Yorker journalist came to. It was really surreal. Came to Chadderton and got the grand tour of Chadderton from yours truly, which is really surreal. I can't, you know, I think you'd be more likely to find professors, curators, um, uh, on Antarctica than you would in BBC producers, etc. in Antarctica, right? Than you would in this pub in Chadderton. It's, to me, it's very surreal that all these people have come with me, a strange parade led by myself, bringing these people to see the pub and whatnot. It's fantastic in a way, but also, yeah, there is just no word for it other than surreal. I can't think of what the woman on the bar who's been there a few times when I've been in, what she thinks of the strange people that I'm bringing her way. Yeah, so I think that basically sums up the publication, the sort of a story of a republication of the book. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Orwell was a fantastic. Well, you know, using Orwell's name is essentially what was what the fuel for all of the different yeses that have happened, right? So the yes from Penguin, because we can say that Orwell loved the book, right? The yes from like front row producers, this book was loved by Orwell. Or the yes from even the Manchester Mill, in the title of a piece, the book that Orwell loved, or something to that effect, right? So it is very much Orwell's doing that, you know, 70 years later, 70 years later, that this book has its second life. And I think he would be very, very happy about that, based on everything that I've read about their relationship. So I'll leave it at that. And I think I've actually managed to do the 40 minutes then.
You've done very nicely. And that was a fabulous story. I mean, yes, you've given Orwell his credit, but your persistence and your enthusiasm is what has really done the trick, I'm sure. Getting books published is never easy, as any author will tell you, especially in effect first-time author. That is a terrific story. Will you be having an event at the Working People's Library?
Ah, yes, I should have mentioned actually. So we're going to be having two events, one in London, with location to be determined, and then the other one won't be in the Working Class Movement Library, but will be co-hosted by it. It's going to be happening at my home from home, Islington Mill, which is an arts. It's like a residential and studio space for artists in Salford. But it's been like, when I say a home from home, I've literally slept there during hard times. So I'm very happy to be able to have it there. It's just down the road from the Working Class Movement Library as well, and it's a bigger space. And if anyone can make it up to Manchester for that launch, for real launch, it'd be fantastic.
What date is that? On the 7th?
We're yet to determine the dates, but it's the conversation happening this week. But hopefully, are very, very close to the time of release. I think Thursday, the 7th of March is a Thursday. So maybe the weekend, or maybe on the day itself, it would be possible.
Well, if you let us know, we'll publicise it to our members.
Thank you, Quentin.
So who would like to ask Jack the first question? Felicia Nemu.
Hello, am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Thank you. This is a bit off the subject, but I can't resist. I'm sure you all know that today is the 74th anniversary of Orwell's death, so I suggest you all eat some chocolate, as I have already done, but don't steal it from your sister. Goodbye.
You know what I'll have in celebration is a bit of black pudding, because that's what Orwell always served to Hilton whenever he visited, and it also happens to be very popular in Medellin.
Oh well, you can't fault that. Of course, the big capital being Bury, of course.
Yeah.
Another question, please. Dave.
Hello, Quentin. Hello, Jack. Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jack, can I commend you for two things? Firstly, the talk that we've had this evening, I have found very riveting, very interesting, and also, it gives a really, really good perspective on that part of Orwell's background, where he's encouraging working class writers, and also for basically bringing Jack Hilton back alive in terms of publication and making the world aware of him again. So thanks very much for those two things. But I'm a bit disturbed, not by you, but by this kind of almost 40-year gap, where basically he seemingly stopped writing, and that may have been prompted by not being being published. I just wanted to kind of, how do you feel that there was a sort of, there were 40 years where we, the world didn't hear anything really?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's I think a tremendous loss really, but although it's important to think that to know that Hilton was still writing, but he was writing for himself, and unfortunately, a lot of the things that he wrote and it was more like, yeah, it's like 34, 40 years when he wasn't writing. A lot of the things that he wrote for himself were lost. What happened to Hilton's artifacts after his death is there's a lot of this. It's a weird, like, I don't know, it was like a suitcase ended up in Wiltshire, which then has ended up in Bristol, which no one knows quite where it is now. We've got some theories. Then some of it ended up in Nottingham University Library. Again, have no idea how. A lot of the writing that Hilton did for himself, that could have formed a basis of other unpublished text, that probably was brilliant, has been lost. Right? Because I mean, I would have loved to have known what he was thinking, how he was understanding and relating to British society in the post-war period as it changed. I mean, I think it's a criminal loss almost that we don't have that, and it is a result of the snobbery and just the just basic the barriers that he faced as a working class author in the north of England, where again, among publishers, even the polite ones, there's this enduring belief that there couldn't possibly be good literature being made and written in the slum like Rochdale. It was a cognitive dissonance for people to believe, for people who control the money in publishing, to believe that a masterpiece could come from somewhere like Rochdale. And the actual geographic distance did not help either. The social distance was one thing, but the geographic distance was another huge problem. There's no coincidence that it was only because Hilton was in London because of the war, because he was working for a fire service, that him and Orwell were able to reconnect basically in 1945.
Thank you very much, Glyn.
Yeah, as someone who spent some time living in Oldham, I'll be interested in the name of the pub in Chadderton. But probably more importantly, I'm interested in the politics of Jack Hilton. I mean, you mentioned that Orwell had been up to Manchester, possibly even before Wigan Pier, to actually go to the inaugural meeting of the International Socialist Party, the Independent Socialist Party. I mean, the Independent Socialist Party was an anti-communist, anti-CPGB, split from the ILP that was in the process of being deeply entered. And it was basically a Northwest operation with some sympathy from the Adelphi. Its headquarters were in Manchester. So yeah. Was Jack a political activist in any way? Was he a member of the ISP, the ILP? What was his political... Yeah.
No, yeah. He was a member of, I believe, he was a member of the ISP, and he was at that inaugural conference. And yeah, his own politics. I mean, I've not spoken so much about, I've spoken very little about Jack Hilton's early life, his first 35 years. I've actually spoken way more about his later life, right? Because I think, there's no better way to learn about it than in Caliban Streets itself, where it's in his own words. But I will just, on this point, because it's actually so important to how he became a writer, is that he, in 1930, as the Great Depression was really, really hitting and basically starving people in Rochdale, but everyone was, almost forced to eat dogs and stuff. Jack Hilton banded together with a small group of mates to to just keep warm in the local library. And while they were there, they decided to, despite their hunger, to try to get to grips with a bit of education. So they started to read and they started to write, and this was all done with the aim of actually doing something about the problems that were happening, that they were all facing, that they were living. So they banded together to organise a few meetings of unemployed workers in Rochdale. And at the first one, they all was, stuttering, stammering. None of them had any kind of ability to speak politically. It's like Caliban before he learned the language of Prospero. It's like Caliban, none of them had any kind of eloquence or ability to articulate what was going on, or understanding of what was going on even. And so they set about to correct this. And at their first meeting, they had just a little boy and a dog, and they were getting mocked by everyone. And then down the line, as they educate themselves quite brutally in terms of the pace, they ended up drawing huge meetings of hundreds of people and having and the meetings became rallies, and the rallies became protests, and the protests became riots, and then eventually the magistrates got hold of Hilton, and what they did was they attributed the riots that were happening to him, and they called him they blamed it all on him, not on the hunger, not on the poverty, on Hilton. And so it was agreed that he would be bound over, which is that he would be banned from political activism of the kind that he was involved in for a certain period, which may even have precluded him from joining a political party openly. I'm not quite clear on that, in exchange for a smaller prison sentence. So he still did go to Strangeways, but he was there for less time than he would have been, because of the censorship, the complete censorship of his political voice. And when he was gagged like that, the only outlet that he had was to turn to writing and pick up pen and paper. So he taught himself to speak for the sake of rallies, and for the sake of doing something about the hunger in his town and the death and everything. And then when he was no longer able to put it to that use, he turned to writing, and that's how Caliban Shrieks came about. But I on the question of whether he was a member of he was never with the communists. In some ways, he admired them for their ability to organise, and he was very much a Marxist, is what I would say, but not in the kind of, when you say Marxist, it conjures a lot of images of social workers, party people, whatever. He was never like that. There's actually a really strong sort of thread of Marxism in Caliban Shrieks, but you wouldn't be able to recognise it even. It's sort of in the way he talks about the Great Depression, and the way he talks about how, the Prosperos of the world had run out of uses for their Calibans because they weren't able to sell the goods that they were getting these workers to produce. So he gives you a sort of political economy of the Great Depression in a very poetic way. But again, it is also influenced by Marx, who he did read during this period.
Thank you. Who would like to ask the next question? Rick. Unmute yourself, please.
There we go. You can hear me?
We can.
Yeah, okay. It's not so much a question as a parallel story of Wigan. When my father was in Wigan researching for the road to Wigan Pier, he heard about, and this was through Adelphi, about a gentleman called George Garrett, who was a docker in Liverpool. And he went through to Liverpool, and he met this guy who wrote a book called 10 Years on the Parish. And he too had a problem in continuing to write, because he lived in a one up, one down house. And eventually he was, because he couldn't tell his workmates that he was a writer, because they would have said he was a bit soft on his feet. Nevertheless, he did as much as he could. But if you go to the Walker Gallery in Liverpool, you can find out about this guy called George Garrett. And there is this similarity between Jack Hilton and Garrett, is that these were really superb writers, and yet they never had the chance to blossom. And if, let's say, if you have a chance to go and find out, I think you would see the parallel between the two.
Yeah, fantastic. I had heard of George Garrett, but I've never been able to trace down a copy of one of his novels. There's a few actually. There's a few different authors from roughly around the same period, working class authors. The other one that is worth me telling you about is a guy from Sheffield called Len Doherty, who wrote this fantastic novel called The Good Lion, which I wrote an article about for a Sheffield publication back in April. And it's one of these novels where, had it been written in America at the same time, it would have been regarded as one of the great American novels, right? But because it was written in Sheffield by a guy, a working class guy who was a miner while he was writing it, so he was writing it in between, long days down First and Pitt. Because of that, none of us know. I didn't know about it until it was raised in the same ways as you just talked about Garrett. It was raised with me because of the Hilton story. So it makes me wonder how many amazing works of literature exist in the world, but have been completely boxed off, or even completely lost to us because of class.
Yeah, that's right. They just simply, for whatever reason, they just died, as they say, on the stem.
Too many,
Yeah.
the simple answer.
And then even more that have never even been written in the first place, but have remained ideas in people's heads. Yeah.
So, anyway, thank you very much. Super talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Les.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for an excellent talk. I wonder whether the fact that he couldn't get a contract with Jonathan Cape in 1945 was partially a consequence of the resistance to the publication of Animal Farm. Jonathan Cape is one of the firms that Orwell approached to publish Animal Farm when he was having difficulty, who refused to publish it. I don't know if Asher's listening to us, but I think that the person who influenced Jonathan Cape was Peter Smollett, the KGB agent who told them not to publish it. Peter Smollett had a hand in getting Animal Farm delayed anyway, but I thought it was Peter Smollett at Jonathan Cape. And it makes me wonder whether, because Hilton was a friend of Orwell's, that there was pressure on them to reject him on that ground as well. I don't know that there was.
Oh, that's fascinating to know. There might be that element of
Jonathan Cape does show up in the delay to the publication of Animal Farm. So it could be that while Hilton and Orwell's friendship gave them some support, it also had a disadvantage as well.
Well, Les, please, I'd love to know your sources for that. I'll get in touch with you after this event.
Marshall,
that's material for like a follow-up about what's been learned recently about the sort of further twists in the story since I mentioned the suitcase earlier on. I think there's a lot more to the story of both Hilton's exit from writing and also his the new life that he's got now that needs to be put out there. So I'd love to include that, definitely.
Yeah.
Marshall, have you got anything to add on that?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, just a little bit, because it is nearly proven that it was Smolka. What is proven, certainly that he was a Russian agent, but what I find particularly interesting, which I only discovered when I was writing about it in the book, it has been known for maybe the last 20 years. I think it was Timothy Garton Ash who wrote about the possibility that Animal Farm was stopped by Peter Smolka. But later on, there were some other details of Peter Smolka's life. He was known in this country as Smollett, and he actually even got an OBE. And I found online several questions posed sort of generally. What was he given his OBE for? But he probably was considered a very good official in the Ministry of Information. But talking about friends, it's very probable that that Peter Smolka was a friend of Jonathan Cape, because I looked up the memories of this woman. If I'm not wrong, let's correct me if I'm wrong. There was this woman, Veronica Wedgwood, I think,
Yes.
who reviewed 1984, and she was also a friend of Orwell's, and I think it was Bernard Crick who tried to get some information from her, and the only little detail that she added to the story was that the official in the Ministry of Information, was also a personal friend of Jonathan Cape. And after Jonathan Cape visiting him there in the ministry, the man either wrote or telephoned him to try and instill this idea, don't publish this book. So I thought that was this little detail, but it was interesting.
It was Veronica Wedgwood who met with Orwell and Hilton to tell Hilton that it would be a no, basically. I don't know if it was exclusively her decision, though. I do feel like she, based on interviews conducted very much, I think interviews conducted in the 80s or maybe late 70s, that she regretted the decision, which does suggest that it perhaps was the result of other influences.
Yeah,
which is fascinating.
Probably it wasn't. I don't think it was her decision, as the decision about Animal Farm definitely wasn't hers. She was a minor official in Jonathan Cape's publishing house. Yeah, at that point when Animal Farm story was developed. Yeah.
So the death by association seems quite likely then. Through Smolka.
Yeah.
Another question, please. No? Well, in which case, if you would like to unmute, let us all thank Jack for an absolutely wonderful presentation.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Next month, Les will be contributing and chairing a session with Peter Stansky and David Taylor, where they'll be talking about 3 of the books which were published last year. Julia, the feminist look at 1984, Masha's book on Orwell and Russia, and Peter will be talking about wifedom. And I know that John Rodden will also wish to add his 10 cents worth to the conversation. So don't miss it. It'll be another great occasion. Thank you all very much. Another super turnout, and thank you, Jack. And let us know the detail of both events, and I'm sure I and others would love to support you on those nights.
Yeah.
Thank you again, everyone, and I shall do. But I'll definitely see you for the next one of these. That sounds absolutely fascinating. The next George talk. So yeah, see you all in a month, everyone, and thank you for listening. And again, I knew that I would learn something from this talk, and that piece of information about the Cold War dynamics it's just I couldn't have guessed that it'd be that, but it's exactly what I suspected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Ta-ra.
Bye.